It was a cold and foggy night when the invitations arrived, one by one, to friends who hadn't seen each other in years. Each black envelope, sealed with a red wax seal, seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The full moon peeked through the clouds, casting eerie shadows down the silent streets. Marcos was the first to open his invitation, his hands trembling slightly. Inside, a handwritten letter in impeccable, old-fashioned penmanship read, "Dear friends, it is with great joy that I invite you for a weekend at my new residence, Blackwood Manor. It will be an opportunity to relive old times and strengthen our bonds. I look forward to seeing you all again. Fondly, Lucas." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Lucas, an old college friend, always had an eccentric streak, but there was something unsettling about that message. It was as if the words concealed a dark secret. The other friends received similar invitations. Each experienced the same sense of unease, but curiosity and nostalgia won out. Perhaps, they thought, it was just their imagination playing tricks. After all, Lucas was a trustworthy friend. On Friday, the 5 friends set out for the mansion, located deep within an ancient, dense forest. The road became increasingly winding and dark, with twisted trees forming menacing arches over the path. The silence of the forest was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional caw of a crow. Upon arriving at Blackwood Manor, they were greeted by its imposing and decaying figure. The structure, in oppressive Gothic style, loomed like a dark sentinel against the night sky. The windows were dusty, and the pointed towers seemed to tear at the clouds, while a thick mist wrapped around the base, making it seem as though the mansion floated on a sea of fog. Lucas appeared at the main door, grinning broadly, but his eyes had a peculiar, almost manic gleam. He ushered them inside, where a crackling fireplace awaited them in the living room, but the warmth of the fire couldn't dispel the chill lodged in their bones. The walls were adorned with old portraits of faces that seemed to follow their every move. The floorboards creaked underfoot, as if whispering forgotten secrets. The atmosphere was thick with something indescribable, a presence that seemed to watch them from every dark corner. As the night wore on, the friends tried to settle in, but the feeling of discomfort persisted. Sighs and whispers echoed down the hallways, and shadows danced on the walls, forming shapes their eyes were keen to avoid. Something was deeply wrong with that mansion, but none of them wanted to be the first to admit it. Enveloped in mystery and dread, they prepared for what was supposed to be a weekend of reunion, but promised to be much more than they bargained for. The clock in the living room chimed 12 times at midnight, each chime reverberating through the walls of the mansion like a grim warning. The friends gathered around a large dining table where Lucas had prepared a sumptuous meal. The candlelight cast flickering shadows on their faces, highlighting the tension in the air. "To our friendship and Lucas's new home," Marcos said, raising a glass of wine, trying to dispel the uneasiness. They all toasted, but the clink of glasses seemed muted, as if the mansion itself absorbed the sound. As they dined, the conversation was strained, and all eyes were irresistibly drawn to the large windows overlooking the dark garden. Outside, the mist moved like a living being, crawling and contorting, forming grotesque shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. After dinner, Lucas suggested exploring the mansion. He led them through narrow corridors adorned with old tapestries and portraits of ancestors that seemed to watch every step they took. As they passed a grand wooden staircase, a loud creak echoed, as if someone or something was following them in the shadows. On the second floor, they entered an immense library. The shelves were filled with old books, many covered in dust and cobwebs. The smell of aged paper and damp wood was strong. In the fireplace, a tepid fire struggled to bring some comfort. "This house has a fascinating history," Lucas said, with an enigmatic tone. It was built in the 19th century and has been the site of many unusual events. Like what? Clara asked, trying to sound brave. Lucas smiled unsettlingly. They say the previous owners practiced dark rituals here. Some locals believe the house is haunted. A frozen silence fell upon them. The friends exchanged nervous glances as the wind howled outside, making the windows vibrate. Pedro, trying to ease the tension, chuckled nervously. "Come on, Lucas. You've always had a vivid imagination." Lucas didn't reply, simply continued to lead them through the house. They entered an abandoned ballroom where candlelight cast distorted shadows on the walls. The marble floor vaguely reflected their pale and tense faces. The air was dense and cold, with a faint smell of mildew mixed with something more indescribable hanging in the air. Suddenly, a low, guttural sound from downstairs interrupted the silence. They all stopped, hearts pounding fast. "What was that?" Anna whispered, her voice trembling. Lucas looked at them with an unreadable expression. Probably just the wind. Or perhaps something else. He smiled again, but this time there was a hint of cruelty in his smile. They returned to the living room, but no one felt at ease anymore. The mansion seemed alive, watching them waiting. The friends retired to their rooms, scattered throughout the long, winding corridors. Marcos entered his room and locked the door, feeling an inexplicable sense of being watched. He lay on the bed, but sleep was impossible. With every creak, every whisper of the wind, he wondered what truly awaited them in that mansion. Meanwhile, downstairs, a shadowy figure moved silently through the corridors, eyes shining with ancient and ravenous malice. The night was only beginning, and the real terror was yet to come. Morning arrived with a pale light that barely penetrated the dusty windows of the mansion. Marcos, with eyes heavy from insomnia, got up and found the friends in the dining room, where a modest breakfast was laid out. Everyone looked tired and uneasy, except for Lucas, who was strangely excited. "How was your night?" he asked, with a peculiar glint in his eyes. "I didn't sleep well," Clara admitted, looking around. "I think I heard footsteps outside my room." "Me too," added Pedro, furrowing his brow. "And I felt like someone was watching me." Lucas just smiled enigmatically. "Perhaps you are just adjusting to the atmosphere of the mansion. It is a place with a lot of history." After breakfast, they decided to further explore the house. Clara and Pedro went to the attic, while Anna and Marcos descended to the basement. Lucas stayed in the library, engrossed in a mysterious book with strange symbols on its cover. In the attic, Clara and Pedro found old chests filled with antique clothes, broken toys, and time-yellowed photographs. There was a large circular window overlooking the garden, now covered by a thin layer of dust. Pedro opened one of the chests and found a black leather diary, its pages written in a sloppy and frantic handwriting. "Look at this, Clara," he said, flipping through the pages. It seems someone was documenting strange things that happened here. Clara looked over his shoulder and read some excerpts. The whispers are getting louder. "I can't sleep. Shadows move on their own." She shuddered. "Maybe we should show this to the others." Meanwhile, in the basement, Anna and Marcos stumbled upon a series of dark and damp tunnels. The stone walls dripped, and the air was heavy and suffocating. Using lanterns to illuminate the way, they advanced down a corridor that seemed never-ending. They found massive wooden doors, some locked and others open to rooms filled with dusty furniture and ancient equipment. In a larger room, they discovered a rudimentary altar, covered with extinguished candles and strange symbols drawn on the floor. At the center, there was a small statue of a grotesque figure, made of some black, glistening material. "This doesn't look good at all," Anna murmured, feeling a knot in her stomach. Marcos nodded, feeling a chill. "Let's go back. We need to tell the others about this." When they all gathered again in the living room, the atmosphere was even more tense. Pedro and Clara showed the diary, and Anna and Marcos reported about the altar. Lucas listened to everything with an inscrutable expression, his fingers tapping on the arm of the chair. "It seems the mansion holds more secrets than we imagined," he finally said. "But that makes it even more interesting, don't you think?" "Interesting is not exactly the word I would use," retorted Marcos, his voice laden with concern. "This house has something wrong." Lucas just smiled again, but this time there was a coldness in his eyes. "Perhaps we should continue our investigations. Who knows what else we might discover." And so, with tension escalating by the moment, the friends once again spread throughout the mansion, each battling the growing sense of fear that had taken root in their hearts. Blackwood Mansion was not just an old house. It was a labyrinth of dark secrets waiting to be unraveled, a mystery that promised more terror than any of them could imagine. The afternoon passed with agonizing slowness. Clara and Anna decided to search the rooms on the second floor, while Marcos and Pedro returned to the attic, hoping to find more clues. Lucas remained in the library, absorbed in his mysterious book. As night fell, a dense and eerie fog enveloped the mansion, making the atmosphere even more oppressive. Clara and Anna were exploring a room decorated with Victorian furniture when a low, continuous sound, like a moan, caught their attention. Clara approached the wall from where the sound seemed to emanate. "Are you hearing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Anna nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "It's like someone is crying." Clara pressed her ear against the wall, and suddenly a sharp cry echoed through the house. The two looked at each other, hearts racing. That came from the attic. Anna shouted. They ran through the corridors, stumbling on worn-out carpets, and climbed the stairs to the attic. When they arrived, they found Marco standing, pale and out of breath, staring at a broken window. "Pedro, he disappeared. What happened?" asked Clara, trying to calm her breathing. "We were reading the diary when we heard a noise," explained Marcos, his voice trembling. "Pedro went to investigate, and then he just vanished. I heard a snap, turned around, and he was gone. Just this broken window." They looked at the window. It was open, and the shattered glass gleamed in the dim attic light. Outside, the fog seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, obscuring any view beyond a few meters. Anna looked down, trying to see something in the darkness, but it was as if the night had swallowed Pedro. "We have to find him," said Clara, determined. "He might be hurt." They descended again, calling out for Pedro, but the mansion seemed to swallow their shouts. Lucas finally appeared, with a somber expression. "What's going on?" he asked, with a morbid curiosity in his tone. "Pedro disappeared," Anna replied, her eyes filled with panic. "We have to look for him." Lucas nodded slowly. "Let's split up again. Maybe he found a secret passage or something." Marcos and Clara went to the garden, while Anna and Lucas stayed inside the house, searching the rooms and corridors. The garden was shrouded in a fog so thick they could barely see each other. Clara held the lantern tightly, illuminating the twisted trees and bushes that seemed to move on their own. "Pedro," Marcos called repeatedly, but the only response was the muffled sound of the wind through the leaves. Back in the mansion, Anna and Lucas entered the cellar. The shadows there were deep and disturbing, creating shapes that seemed to move in the corner of their eyes. Anna felt a constant presence behind her, as if something was watching every move. "We have to find Pedro," said Anna, her voice trembling. "We can't leave him here." Lucas looked at her with an inscrutable expression. "Sometimes people get lost in places like this. Perhaps Pedro found something. He shouldn't have." Anna shivered down her spine. "What do you mean? There are secrets here that are best left in the past," Lucas replied, his voice low and dark. "But if we want to find Pedro, we'll have to face those secrets." The search continued deep into the night, but Pedro seemed to have vanished without a trace. The mansion, with its endless corridors and unsettling shadows, seemed to have swallowed yet another soul. And as the clock struck the hours in the darkness, the remaining friends wondered what other horrors awaited in Blackwood Mansion, where every corner hid a secret and every shadow harbored a fear. The following morning brought a growing sense of despair. The friends were exhausted and emotionally shaken. The dense fog still lingered over the mansion, and Pedro's disappearance loomed over them like an oppressive shadow. Lucas, with his unsettling calm, suggested they continue exploring the mansion and the underground tunnels that Anna and Marcos had discovered the day before. Descending once again into the basements, the team was armed with lanterns, knives, and a desperate determination to find Pedro. The stone corridor felt even colder and damper, the air heavy with the smell of mold and something undefinable, something that seemed to rot in the depths of the earth. "We have to stick together," Clara said, her voice firm despite the obvious fear in her eyes. "If we split up, it will be easier for whatever it is to catch us." They agreed and advanced through the main tunnel, their steps echoing off the stone walls. The path led to a fork. They chose the left passage, which seemed older and less used. The walls were covered in moss and strange symbols reminiscent of ancient inscriptions. Marcos suddenly stopped, illuminating a set of markings on the wall. "Look at this," he said, pointing. These symbols seemed to be telling a story. Lucas approached, examining the drawings. "It appears to be some kind of ritual. Something to seal or summon something. What if Pedro is trapped somewhere because of this ritual?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. "Then we need to understand what these symbols mean," Clara replied, trying to decipher the drawings. They continued down the tunnel until they reached a large chamber. In the center, there was a stone altar similar to what Anna and Marcos had seen before, but larger and more elaborate. Around the altar, there were extinguished candles and more symbols carved into the floor. At the top of the altar, a small metal box was locked with a rusty padlock. "This looks important," Marcos said, approaching the box. Lucas carefully picked up the box. "We need to open this. It may contain answers." They returned to the mansion and in the living room, attempted to open the box. After several frustrated attempts, Marcos finally managed to break the padlock. Inside, there was an old leather book and a small vial of dark liquid. Clara picked up the book, flipping through the yellowed pages. It's a diary. It seems to have belonged to the original owner of the mansion. She read aloud, "The rituals are necessary to keep the entity contained. The sacrifice of blood is imperative. Those who do not follow the rules will be taken. What does this mean?" Anna asked, fear evident in her voice. Lucas picked up the vial, looking at the viscous liquid. Perhaps this is part of the ritual. Something to control or banish the entity. But what is this entity? Marcos asked, feeling a knot in his stomach. Clara continued to read. The entity is ancient, older than the earth itself. It feeds on the fear and blood of the living. It must be kept dormant, or it will bring ruin upon us all. The ensuing silence was heavy and oppressive. Each of them felt the weight of what they were facing. The mansion was not just a haunted place. It was a prison for something malevolent, something they had unwittingly awakened. "We have to perform the ritual," Lucas finally said. "We need to seal this entity before it's too late." "But how do we do that?" Anna asked, almost in a panic. Lucas looked at the vial and then at the book. "We'll need all the elements described here. We need to find the right location and follow the instructions exactly." As they prepared for the ritual, the mansion seemed to close in around them, as if aware of their intentions. Time was running out, and the danger was palpable. Every step they took, every shadow that moved, was a reminder that they were fighting something far beyond their understanding. Hope was fragile, but it was all they had to save Pedro and possibly their own lives. The ritual was complex and filled with obscure details that needed to be followed to the letter. Clara, Marcos, Anna, and Lucas spread out throughout the mansion to gather the ingredients mentioned in the diary: black candles, salt, dried herbs, and the vial with the dark liquid. Tension was palpable. Everyone felt like something was watching their every move. As Clara and Anna searched for the herbs in the kitchen, Marcos and Lucas rummaged through the attic for the candles. Marcos could not shake the growing sense of panic. Every sound, every shadow seemed threatening. "We need to hurry," said Lucas, lighting a candle to better illuminate the space. "The longer we take, the more power the entity gains." Marcos nodded, but couldn't help but notice the strange expression on Lucas's face. There was a cold, almost inhuman determination in his eyes. In the kitchen, Clara and Anna found an old cupboard filled with jars of spices and herbs. Clara reached out to grab a jar of salt when a cabinet door burst open with a bang, revealing a secret passage. "What is this?" Anna whispered, her eyes wide. "I don't know, but we need to investigate," Clara replied, taking the lantern and illuminating the passage. The narrow corridor seemed to lead to a small hidden room behind the kitchen. In the center, there was a circle drawn on the floor with familiar symbols. Clara recognized the symbols from the diary and realized that this was the designated location for the ritual. "I've found the place," Clara said, excited. "Let's call the others." Anna nodded and turned to leave but froze at the sound of a chilling whisper in her ear. "Clara," she spun around in panic, but saw no one. "Clara, did you hear that?" Clara looked around, tension rising. "I heard, but I didn't see anything." "Let's go, we need to get out of here." Back in the living room, they all gathered and began to set up the ritual circle. They placed the candles at specified points, poured the dark liquid in the center, and sprinkled the salt and herbs around. "It's almost ready," Lucas said, adjusting the position of the candles. "We need complete silence during the ritual. Any interruption could be fatal." Anna, visibly nervous, nodded. "Understood," as they were about to begin. A deafening scream echoed through the mansion. It was Clara. Everyone turned to find her, but Clara had disappeared. All that was left was a trail of blood leading down the hallway. "No," Anna shouted, running toward the trail. Marcos held her, trying to stop her. "Anna, wait. We can't go alone." Lucas approached, his expression serious. "She was taken. The entity is attacking us directly now. But we have to do something." Anna protested, tears streaming down her face. "We need to finish the ritual," Lucas said firmly. "If we don't, we're all doomed." With heavy hearts, they continued the ritual, feeling the malevolent presence grow stronger with each passing second. The mansion seemed to vibrate with a sinister energy, as if it were alive, feeding off their fear. Lucas began chanting the words from the book, and the circle started to glow with a spectral light. The air grew thicker, and the whispers intensified, merging with the distant cries of Clara and Pedro. Anna and Marcos held hands, trying to focus. But suddenly, An invisible force separated them and threw them against the walls. The ritual was interrupted, and the spectral light vanished. "We can't give up," Marcos shouted, trying to get up. Lucas, lying on the ground, looked at them with despair. "We have to continue. If we don't finish the ritual, we're all doomed." But the entity wouldn't give them another chance so easily. The mansion seemed to tremble, and the shadows intensified, taking on grotesque and threatening forms. Time was running out, and the true battle for survival was only just beginning. Marcos, Anna, and Lucas were sprawled on the floor of the living room, stunned by the invisible force that interrupted the ritual. The mansion seemed to have turned into a living being, pulsating with malevolent energy. The shadows on the walls twisted, taking on grotesque and threatening forms. "We need to get up," said Lucas, his voice trembling but determined. "We can't let the entity win." Anna and Marcos struggled to rise. Every movement felt like a monumental effort, as if the air was saturated with malice. The mansion watched them, every wall an eye, every sound a sinister whisper. Lucas grabbed the book and began chanting the ritual words, trying to ignore Clara and Pedro's screams echoing in the distance, like a continuous lament. The candles ignited, but the light was unstable, flickering as if it were struggling against an invisible force. Suddenly, a deafening crash resonated through the room. A hidden door swung open violently, revealing a dark tunnel. From the tunnel emerged a figure. It was Pedro, but he didn't seem the same. His eyes were glazed, and an expression of absolute terror distorted his face. "Pedro!" Anna screamed, running toward him. Marcos tried to hold her back, but Anna was too quick. As she approached Pedro, she stopped abruptly, feeling an icy chill emanating from him. "Pedro, what happened?" Pedro slowly lifted his head, and his lips moved, but the voice that came out was not his. It was a cold whisper laden with malice. "He is ours now." Anna recoiled, horrified. "No, that can't be true." Lucas continued the ritual with renewed determination. "We can't let the entity take over. We need to seal it now." Marcos and Anna returned to the circle, holding hands again. The spectral glow returned, stronger this time, and the shadows began to retreat as if fearing the light. But Pedro advanced, moving like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. "You cannot stop us," Pedro whispered, approaching the circle. "We are eternal. Your struggle is futile." Marcos felt a chill run down his spine. "Lucas, we need more time. He's trying to distract us." Lucas nodded, focusing on the final words of the ritual. The light within the circle intensified, casting a blinding glow that made Pedro retreat momentarily. But then, Clara appeared at the entrance of the tunnel, her face pale and marked by tears. "Please, help me," she pleaded, her voice broken by fear. Anna felt her heart break. "Clara, we're here. Stay away from Pedro." Clara took a hesitant step forward, but the entity controlling Pedro seized her, pulling her close. "She is ours too," the icy voice declared. "All of you are." Despair gripped Anna and Marcos. Lucas, seeing that the ritual was nearly complete, shouted, "Hold on. We're almost there." Pedro, or whatever that thing was now, let out a scream of pure fury and lunged at the circle. The candles flickered dangerously, and the glow began to waver. "No, we won't give in," Marcos shouted, gripping Anna's hand tighter. In the last moment, Lucas uttered the final words of the ritual, and an explosion of light filled the room. Pedro and Clara were thrown back, collapsing to the floor unconscious. The shadows dissipated, and the air seemed to clear. Marcos and Anna looked around, breathing heavily. "Did we make it?" Anna asked, her voice full of hope and fear. Lucas closed the book, exhausted, but with a glimmer of triumph in his eyes. "Yes, we did it. The entity is sealed again." Pedro and Clara began to stir, regaining consciousness. "What happened?" Clara asked, confused and scared. "It's all right now," Anna said, helping her to her feet. "You're safe." Marcos approached Pedro, checking to see if he was okay. "Pedro, are you back?" Pedro nodded, still trembling. "Yes. I think so." It was horrible. Lucas looked at his friends, his expression serious. "We need to leave. The mansion is sealed, but this place will never be safe." Together, they began to leave Blackwood Mansion, carrying the weight of what they had faced. The dawn brought new light, washing away the darkness of the night before. But the terror they experienced would stay with them forever, a reminder that some secrets must remain buried, and some doors should never be opened. As the group walked away from the mansion, a sense of relief began to settle in. The rising sun dispelled the mist and illuminated the path that would lead the friends back to safety. However, the calm was only superficial. An invisible shadow still loomed over them. "We need to head straight to town," Lucas suggested, his voice still trembling. "We need to tell someone about what happened here." Everyone agreed, but as they approached the main gate, a low, rhythmic sound caught Anna's attention. It was a thumping noise, as if something was trapped and trying to get out. She stopped, turning slowly toward the mansion. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice laden with unease. Marcos frowned. "Hear what?" Anna pointed to the mansion. "I think it's coming from inside. We need to check it out." "No," Clara said quickly. "We've been through too much. We need to get out of here." But Anna was determined. What if someone else is still in there? What if we didn't finish the job? Reluctantly, the friends returned to the mansion. The thumping sound continued, guiding them back to the basement. The corridor seemed even darker in the morning light, as if the darkness were clinging to every corner. They reached the chamber where the ritual had been interrupted. In the center of the now extinguished circle, a figure was kneeling, frantically pounding on the floor. It was Pedro, but he looked different, as though something inside him was still fighting to get out. "Pedro?" Marcos called, cautiously approaching. Pedro lifted his head, his eyes filled with desperation. "You don't understand. We didn't finish. The entity is still here." Lucas approached, his eyes wide. "But how?" "We completed the ritual, not completely," Pedro whispered. "There's still a part of the ritual we didn't do. Something to seal the entity for good." Anna looked at Lucas. "What did we miss? What else needs to be done?" Lucas grabbed the diary again, quickly flipping through the pages. His eyes stopped on a section that seemed to have been torn and then restored with tape. "Here it is. We need a final sacrifice, a sacrifice of someone who has been touched by the entity." The group fell silent, the horror of the situation sinking into each of them. Who is going to do it?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Pedro stood up slowly, his hands trembling. "Me. The entity touched me. If necessary, I'll make the sacrifice." Marcos tried to protest. "No, Pedro. There must be another way." "There isn't," Lucas said firmly. "If we don't complete the ritual, the entity will return. We need to do this now." With heavy hearts, they prepared the circle once more. Pedro, visibly terrified but resolute, lay down in the center. Clara, Anna, Marcos, and Lucas began chanting the final words of the ritual, feeling the energy in the room grow again. The spectral light returned, more intense than before. The shadows around them began to writhe, as if trying to escape the light. Pedro closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, my friends," he whispered. "Remember me." With the final words, the light exploded in a blinding flash. When it dissipated, Pedro was gone, leaving only an empty space in the center of the circle. The silence in the chamber was absolute. They all felt Pedro's absence like an unbearable weight. But they knew his sacrifice was necessary to seal the entity forever. "We need to leave," Lucas said, his voice hoarse. "It's done." The group left the mansion in somber silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The house, finally at peace, stayed behind, guarding its dark secrets and the sacrifice of a brave friend. The way back to town was long, but they now knew the real battle had been won, albeit at a terrible cost. In the distance, the sun shone, promising a new beginning. But deep in their minds, the memory of Blackwood Mansion and the horrors they faced would remain forever, an invisible but indelible scar on their souls. The journey back to town was quiet and heavy. Each of the friends was absorbed in their own thoughts, processing Pedro's sacrifice and the horrors they had faced. When they finally reached town, they went straight to the police station to report the incident. The sheriff, a burly man with tired eyes, listened to their story with initial skepticism, but the seriousness and terror in the young people's eyes convinced him to investigate. He organized a team and promised to accompany the friends back to the mansion the next day. That night, they all gathered at Clara's house, trying to find some solace in each other's company. They sat in the living room, the soft light of the lamps contrasting sharply with the oppressive darkness of Blackwood Mansion. "I still can't believe Pedro is gone," said Anna, her voice choked. "He was so brave." Marcos nodded, his eyes distant. "He saved us all. We owe him that." Lucas was silent, flipping through the diary they had brought from the mansion. He stopped on a page, frowning. "There's something here, something we didn't see before." "More secrets?" Clara asked, exasperated. "Maybe," Lucas replied, "but it looks more like a warning. It says that even after the ritual, the entity may leave traces in objects or people it has been in contact with." Anna shuddered. "What does that mean for us? I don't know," Lucas admitted. "But we need to stay alert. We can't let our guard down yet." The next morning, the sheriff and his team met with the friends and headed for Blackwood Mansion. When they arrived, the house was quiet and seemingly harmless in the daylight. But the feeling of unease was inescapable. The sheriff's team began to search the mansion, while Lucas, Clara, Anna, and Marcos guided them, explaining the events of the previous night. When they entered the basement chamber, they found the ritual circle still intact, but with a disturbing detail, a strange mark in the center where Pedro had disappeared. "That mark wasn't there before," Marcos said, pointing it out. The sheriff examined the mark, some kind of symbol carved into the stone. "It looks like some kind of seal," he said, "but I don't know what it means." Meanwhile, Lucas continued flipping through the diary. "There's something here about seals. It says an incomplete seal can be a portal, a door for the entity to return." Then Pedro. "He might not have completely sealed the entity," Clara said, panic rising in her voice. "We need to destroy that mark," Anna said decisively. "We can't risk the entity coming back." The sheriff called his men and began working to remove the symbol. But while they were occupied, one of the officers let out a scream and fell, holding his head. "Oh my God! It's here! It's here!" The officer began convulsing on the floor, screaming in pain. Lucas tried to help, but an invisible force pushed him away. "We need to get out of here," Marcos shouted, But before they could react, the room was engulfed by an oppressive darkness, and the air turned icy. The shadows began to move again, forming grotesque figures that surrounded the group. "He's back," Anna whispered, fear evident in her voice. Lucas clutched the diary tightly. "We need to finish what we started. There's only one way to seal this for good." "How?" Clara asked, desperate. "We need to destroy the diary," Lucas replied. "It's the entity's anchor. If we destroy the diary, we destroy its connection to this world." Without hesitation, Lucas threw the diary into the center of the circle and lit one of the remaining candles, tossing it onto the book. The flames began to consume the leather and pages, and the shadow's screams intensified. "It's working," Marcos shouted. "Keep going." The shadows began to dissipate, and the room filled with a bright light. The officer on the floor stopped convulsing, breathing heavily. The mark in the center of the circle began to disappear, and the darkness retreated. When the flames finally died out, the room was silent again. The diary had been reduced to ashes, and the mark on the floor had vanished completely. "It's done," Lucas said, exhausted. "The entity is gone." The sheriff and his men were pale but relieved. "Let's get out of here," the sheriff said. "I don't want anything more to do with this place." As they left the mansion for the last time, a feeling of peace finally began to settle over the friends. The entity had been destroyed, and Blackwood Mansion could finally rest. Pedro's sacrifice was not in vain, and his friends could move on, carrying with them the scars, but also the certainty that they had defeated the darkness. With the entity finally destroyed and Blackwood Mansion sealed forever, the friends tried to resume their lives. The experience had changed them profoundly, leaving emotional scars that would take time to heal. Pedro was remembered as a hero, a friend who gave his life to save the others. His absence left an indescribable void, but his courage inspired the friends to move forward, even in the darkest moments. Lucas, Clara, Anna, and Marcos kept in regular contact, finding comfort in each other's company. They knew what they had gone through had bonded them in a way nothing else could. However, even with the entity destroyed, the shadow of Blackwood Mansion still loomed over them. The memories of the horrors they faced were hard to forget, and they knew it would take time to overcome the trauma completely. But gradually, life returned to normal. Lucas returned to his studies and got involved in extracurricular activities that helped keep his mind busy. Clara dedicated herself to her work, finding solace in the routine and sense of purpose it provided. Anna volunteered at an animal shelter, finding comfort in the company of innocent creatures and the feeling of making a difference in their lives. Marcos immersed himself in volunteer work, helping with community projects and trying to channel his energy into good. As the months passed, Blackwood Mansion became just a distant memory, a scary story they shared with a few. But the lessons they learned there stayed with them forever, reminding them of the fragility of life and the importance of friendship and bravery in the darkest moments. And so, as the sun set over the city, the friends looked to the horizon, ready to face the future with renewed hope and unyielding determination. For in the end, they knew that together they could overcome any challenge life threw at them. And with that, they took a step toward a new beginning, leaving behind the shadows of the past and embracing the unknown with courage and resolve. Enjoyed this spine-chilling story? If you love mysteries, suspense, and horror tales that keep you on the edge of your seat, don't miss any episodes on our channel. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to be the first to know when new scary videos are released. Leave a like if you want more terrifying stories and comment below what you thought about this journey through the Blackwood Mansion. We have many more adventures waiting for you. Let's continue this breathtaking experience together.